I'm Dean M. Collins. I grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky, also lived in Indiana as a kid, heartland, rural America, humble beginnings, and I've taken quite a journey in life from the military to the airlines to and now back to music, kind of where I started just playing guitar on that farm, full circle.
Through the cornfields with the sun shining on my face, as the radio plays a future classic by an artist who will pass away.
What does the title of this album mean?
The title of the album, Land Where the Wishes Come True, is it kind of harkens to the American dream, but the American dream I grew up in rural America in the heartland. And it wasn't like I'm going to go to Hollywood and be famous, or it was more like I'm going to plant these crops and raise these pigs and cows and you know, give these kids a better life. So it's actually a very complex title, probably the most difficult thing I've written, because it arcs from the land where the wishes come true, eking out the American dream, to my father. When he was a kid, he thought California was the land of dreams. He thought that was the land where the wishes come true. Growing up in the Midwest, that was like magic town. And then the land where the wishes come true became kind of a utopia. Like after my parents divorced, I dreamt like, what if, you know, maybe they get back together in this magical world. And at the end, it's more of it becomes heaven or the afterlife, when my father says, maybe we'll meet again someday in the land where the wishes come true. So that's kind of the full circle. It's almost like life.
What is it like writing so much about where you came from in the place where you live in Los Angeles?
It's interesting thinking back on childhood, because we didn't have a lot, and where I live now, we live in a land of plenty in California. So I came from a hard scrabble upbringing in in poverty, really, and so there's a huge contrast. So it's interesting to sing about these things when I feel I'm in a place where it's there's so much. But I think it's important because I don't think you necessarily have to be tied to one, and I think it's important to remember where we came from. And so I look back on it, it keeps me grounded, and I think there's some universal stories in there, because even if people didn't grow up in the same way, we've all faced adversity. Life does not play out the way we would script it. So I think that's kind of a universal. And it also has, kind of a hopeful arc too. So you can have a tough beginning and not necessarily, a tough ending if, you work hard and all these, you never give up, I guess.
What's it been like to juxtapose your musical creative passion and your professional life?
So my life has taken a journey from a farm in Kentucky to a Navy pilot, to an airline pilot. But I think with me, it's always been important to connect to my roots and to connect to, where things began. And that applies to old friendships as well. I treasure those, because that person I was then, I like that person a lot. And I never want to lose that person. So I think music has become a touchstone, in a sense, for that. If I get off track, I can listen to a song that maybe was important to me at some point in my life, and it brings me right back. We would say recage or gyro. It would bring me back to, what's important. And I think music has always been that safe spot. That on that farm, I was isolated. I was away from a lot of kids, and I would entertain myself, but it was also a tool. That's how I remembered poems and words for assignments. I would play little notes so that I would remember things, because I knew that I could remember music. And it also brought me back to really happy moments in my childhood. My dad was a traveling feed salesman for Ralston Purina, and every once in a while I would ride around with him, and we'd go to these little farms. But on the way, We're listening to Johnny Cash. We're listening to Buck Owens. We're listening to, some of that just great music. And that just brings me to a really good place, because that's set into my musical DNA. The Beatles, he had a very diverse music library, but I remember pulling out the Jimi Hendrix albums and just staring at them and thinking, wow, and the Beatles, and I would put on the Beatles. I'm 5-6 years old and I'm putting on Beatles records, and that definitely got in there. And Johnny Cash, I still think, was singing How High's the Water, Mama, as we're driving to and from these farms. So I think that's why music has stayed in there. And when I went to the military and now in the airlines, I've just never lost that, because that keeps me grounded, ties me to my roots, and it's always there. If I ever get off track, I know how to get right back on.
Tell me more about the influences behind this record in particular, and why you feel like you trended back toward a core of country music at this stage. Because let's just talk. You can talk about in college, and after that was more pop and rock and modern rock and pop, and you've trended toward country. Okay.
So in my early days, when I first started music in college, it was more indie. U2 was out, REM was out, and even John Cougar Mellencamp, who then became John Mellencamp, those were all out, and so they all kind of had an influence. But a lot of my early music was kind of jangly pop with maybe some influences from REM and so forth. But I think all through the years, even growing up in Kentucky, I think when something is so available, it almost is like cliche. Oh, of course I have to like country music and bluegrass because I'm from Kentucky. And so I think I fought against that in my youth and listened to Led Zeppelin. I listened to AC/DC. I listened to music that was not, what a Kentuckian would listen to. And I think with age and experience and hopefully some maturity, I came back and I said, you know what, this music is really something, and it's really powerful, and it is really, some of it's just technically brilliant. And so, as a kid, Michael Cleveland was playing around. He wanted to jam with everyone, every little festival or whatever, but he would pop up around where I grew up. And I remember my brother talking about this kid who was amazing. And I think it was back in like 2000, 2001, I visited town, and there he was playing at our beautiful courthouse, just standing in front of there with his band. And I was, transfixed. And so I think that kind of brought me back to my roots of what was around me that I kind of ignored growing up. And then I thought, well, it doesn't have to be pure country, pure bluegrass. I can have my approach to it and bring those things together with some of my, musical heroes. I mean, when Mellencamp came out with Scarecrow, I remember listening to it, and I sat on the front porch on our farm, and I looked across the creek, and they were having an auction, and that farm had been there, 100 years or more, and they were hauling the stuff off. And I remember that snare in that song. I think they put some kind of metal hitting in there, and that really hit me like a hammer. And I thought, man, this is real. And farms were shutting down, and I could see it. And I said, this John Cougar guy, there's something to this. And then when he came out with Lonesome Jubilee, I was just blown away. The band reinvented itself, and they melded the violin, accordions, all these amazing instruments into what was a rocker, and so that just changed the game. And I thought, well, you know what? People can do that. You can change. And it took me 50-something years to admit that maybe I was a little wrong about country and Americana and bluegrass and some of the, my own roots. So that's how I got here.
Nicely put. Tell us more about the landscape we're seeing in the music video for Land Which Come True. That or the geography, that's your chance to sort of take somebody on a tour.
So in my song, Land Where the Wishes Come True, there's an opening shot, and it looks like a world. Now, to the young me, that was my world. That's Bardstown, Kentucky. and it's the main courthouse. But also in that shot, there's a school where I first went to first grade. There's a church, the Catholic church where I first went to church. There's the courthouse, the main drag, the library. Everything from my childhood is in that shot. So in a sense, as a young me, that was my world. So there's kind of this world, and then it fades into the courthouse, which was a beautiful courthouse built the same year as the Ryman, and they could be twins. They could be, long lost brothers, sisters, whatever. Very similar architecture and just stunning buildings. So that kind of welcomes you into the video, and the juxtaposition is a lot of the shots of me in California and some of the most iconic bridges in Pasadena. And so, right off the bat, you're transported from my childhood, my whole journey. You skip to the end, and there I am in the land where the wishes come true, though I started in the land where the wishes come true. So that's kind of the full circle. And then I shot my nephew, and there were some shots in Montana, which were the flashbacks. Just budget purposes, we had to shoot that. But I wanted to capture that rural feeling of my father and I driving in the car and sing along the radio. And point of reference, my dad couldn't sing. He was tone deaf. And he confessed to me after I finished this album, he said, "Son, you're making my wishes come true. You're living my dream life." He said, "If I could have done anything in life, it would have been music. And I'm tone deaf, but I've always loved it." And so that was just a great moment. So I tried to capture that with my nephew and my brother-in-law in that shot. And so that's kind of the tie-in from humble beginnings to where I am now, and the journey between.
And then you alluded to, you told about Michael Cleveland, but describe the collaborators you had to work with on this and your tapping Nashville.
So this album has some musicians on it that I pinch myself when I read my own credits on this album. Just phenomenal talents, once in a generation talents. And it was kind of organic how it developed. I had worked with a few amazing people to start this, and then I started reaching out, and people kept saying yes. And COVID had kind of hit at this time, so the lockdown was coming, all the concerts were going away. Maybe that worked in my favor, but I do remember joking with Kenny Aronoff. I said, you did the Lonesome Jubilee, and we're doing the Lonesome Jamboree, because we're all sitting isolated in studios doing the parts. And but it was an interesting thing, unlike most of the bluegrass performers. I've always really liked the studio. I played live in college, but I love the studio environment. So my first meeting with Michael Cleveland was putting on the headphones and listening to the track, and he said, "I hope you like it." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is stunning." And so it was very interesting. There were emails back and forth, and it just kind of all came together beautifully, but not in a typical Nashville or bluegrass way, but it was kind of forced by the situation. And everything they sent was incredible. And the worst was when they sent 3 takes. I'm not sure which one you like. And it's like, do you want some Pappy Van Winkle? Do you want some George T. Stagg? Or do you want some William LaRue Weller? It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. It's an embarrassment of riches. So that was probably the most, thrilling thing, that I've experienced, was just getting to hear that level of talent isolated on a track, just them, and just thinking of the lifetime of playing and experience in those notes. That was very humbling.
That's very nice. Nice touch.
The second single is called "It Could Have Been Me," and I jokingly call it a thinking man's drinking song. And it reflects on a past relationship that didn't pan out. And I like how it kind of goes against the trope where a little girl broke my heart or whatever, because at the end of the song it's revealed that it was the singer, the guy who actually sabotaged the relationship because he knew he wasn't good enough for this person. And so the whole time you're like, you know, he's regretful or whatever, but at the end you realize that he knows it was him. He did it, and he finally owns up to it. So I think it's an interesting journey, and I was really lucky because my goddaughter, she appears in it in actual film. We shot film in the at Joshua Tree with her boyfriend, and it turned out really, really well. And it was so fun to work with, you know, people quite a bit younger than me and kind of turn them free and see what they could do. And I think that really ties in nicely to the flashback sequences where I'm looking at the younger me, how much happiness we had, and that I basically blew it. But, you know, it was funny because Kenny Aronoff turned to me after we did it, and he loved the song, and he said, that's a hit. He wasn't necessarily talking to me then, but he just loved how it felt. He said, in the old days, that would have been a hit. And then he said, this is a song with 11 effing breakdowns, because there's so many stops in the song and kind of pauses, and so he kind of joked about it like that. But anyway, so that's the next single coming, and I'm very proud of that song as well. It's not necessarily autobiographical, which is kind of a twist for me because most of my stuff is very personal, and this is trying to find that universal, sitting at the bar, thinking about, man, boy did I blow that one. So. That's the story behind it.
Why don't you describe your relationship with Kenny Aronoff and why he's become so central to your musical world? Because he's the drummer on this project.
Yes. So Kenny Aronoff and I met a few years ago, and through a mutual friend who went to college with him. And this mutual friend and I were talking about music, and I told him the story about how I first, how John Cougar went from, whatever, the girls like him, to holy cow, this guy's a friggin' poet laureate of Indiana. But Kenny was a big part of that. And after I started, totally raving and fanboying about Kenny Aronoff, I said, well, would you like to meet that knucklehead? And I'm like, what? And he pulls out the phone and he calls him. And so he said, I'm going to set up a dinner. We'll all get together. And so it's like, you get to meet someone you looked up to, because those songs, when they came out were just like, and especially the drumming just really hit. And so I get to meet a musical hero. And so this mutual friend said, look, you guys both grew up in the Midwest, you're gonna hit it off. And so sure enough, we meet at this party, we talk for about an hour, and he's telling me amazing stories, and we exchange info, and I'm thinking, well, this is LA, we'll do lunch, it'll never happen. So later that night, I checked my email, and he said, send me some songs, I wanna hear it. And so I shared with him, and he said, you got any more? I said, I got more. And so pretty soon we'd done a whole album. But what was remarkable was his work ethic, his talent, and just how real he was and authentic. And when I would go to the studio, I'd break out the guitar, and he told me about writing songs with Mellencamp around the kitchen table. Mellencamp bring a guitar, he'd tap it out on the table. If Mellencamp kept playing, that's a good sign. If he stopped, put the guitar away, that's a bad sign. So he told me some of those stories, and here we were in the studio, and he takes notes on everything. He's got thousands. He writes every song out. So somewhere he's got, stuff from Mellencamp, stuff with, the surviving Beatles, like everyone he's ever played with, he has those. And here he was with one for me. And he's editing, and we're talking, I'm playing guitar, and we're doing it like old school. There's no MacBooks, there's no iPads, we're just sitting in the studio doing it. And I remember he's like, this intro, no, this is too cliche. And he's running through all the things he's worked on, like what works for this song? What's gonna kick this song off, grab him by the lapel and hold him. And so all these things are going through his head. It was remarkable to work with him. And I had to kind of divorce myself from, oh my gosh, here I am with one of my musical heroes, to, wow, we're making some music together. And we've been close ever since. And he is so incredibly busy. He's shared a world with me that I would never have seen. But he's introducing me to people, hey, this is Stephen Stills. Hey, this is Billy Gibbons. These are all the people he's working with. And I just want to say, I'm an airline pilot. And Kenny says, we're making some great music together. So it's been just a real gift.
I'm so glad to ask that. That's a really great story. I knew it would be.
Well, I'm Dean M. Collins, and I have to say I added the M because my mom looked for my music online once and found the wrong person. So I said, well, I'll put an M in there. But anyway, I grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky. Also lived in Indiana as a kid. Heartland, rural America, humble beginnings. And I've taken quite a journey in life, from the military to the airlines to and now back to music. Kind of where I started, just playing guitar on that farm, full circle. And so I've had I've experienced a lot, and all these stories have been building up in me for years, and I'm finally taking them back to where I began, and would just love to share them with people. I want people to hear these powerful stories that connect us all. One of the biggest things to me, and I learned this later in life, was that I've always wanted to connect people. I've always wanted to reconnect with old friends, to stay connected to old friends, and it's ironic that my job, my day job, is to connect people. I connect people by passengers with families, with friends, with new jobs, new beginnings, endings, all of that. So it's all about the connections, and what I believe with these stories that I tell is there are so many universals, and we hear about all the things that are so divisive between people, but there are also universal commonalities, and that's what I want to get to. I want to connect people. They didn't grow up with a 2-hole outhouse in the back, but they had some tough times, or maybe they were, couldn't meet the rent, or they couldn't take the kids out to dinner, or whatever. That's the same thing. You don't have to eat government cheese to know, to have to know what it's like to kind of struggle. So that's what I try to put into these songs and these stories, and it would be an absolute honor to know that people were hearing these and say, they can relate to whatever. Everyone can relate to love, to loss, to disappointments, and to hope. And I think overall in this album, the title track, Land Where the Wishes Come True, is almost, it's a very hopeful take. There's sadness in it, but it's a hopeful as opposed to hopeless. And when Woody Guthrie did This Land Is Your Land, This Land Is My Land, it became almost a national, unofficial national Dust Bowl anthem. And so it was almost something like that I wanted, now he was coming maybe from a different place than I was, but what I was trying to get to was the common reaction to that song. And so I wanted people maybe to believe that, maybe your wishes can come true. Don't give up, keep hope. So, maybe it's a little naive on my part, but that kind of drove this album. But to do that, you have to include all the sadness and heartbreak and loss, because that's all part of the journey. That's all part of the journey of life. So that's what I threw in this album, and I would be honored if, people listen to it, love it, and really appreciate these incredible musicians, which was the biggest gift, because I wanted to have the best people there are to play the music, to tell these stories, because I want them to shine too, and they help these stories so much. They help them soar. They're amazing playing. So big thank you to the musicians who gave me a chance.